Debs, how are you?
Very bleary-eyed. I've been up for more than 12 hours already, and it's only just gone 1 o'clock in the afternoon over here in the UK. I've also travelled a lot.
So you're back from Ankara. You're back from the Whiplash Summit.
I am, and it almost nearly wasn't because our flight from Ankara to Istanbul got delayed. And so me and Jordan, my producer, had to leg it through Istanbul airport. And anyone who's been to Istanbul airport will know it's quite big to get our to get our connecting flight.
It's huge, isn't it? It's like a city. Now then, I hope you weren't. I hope you weren't transporting any pistols through customs.
Sadly, I wasn't. And it turns out, for some reason, our Prime Minister wasn't either, even though he'd been given a personalised one by the Turkish president as part of this summit.
We are talking, of course, about the gift that the host of the NATO summit gave to all the NATO member leaders, a pistol, not a pretend pistol, not a decommissioned pistol, a real pistol, and bullets to go with it. All of them got given one. The Belgian Prime Minister apparently only discovered his once he'd arrived back in Belgium. And as you say, Keir Starmer, he left his behind, didn't he?
Yeah, he did. We thought as Prime Minister, you'd think you could just do anything and even bring, a live pistol and ammunition into the country. But apparently that would be against the law. So I think he's left it to be decommissioned.
Like diplomatic baggage, surely you can bring anything in. How very Starmer of him to decide to do the right thing, leave it behind. I imagine Boris Johnson, he'd have probably walked in brandishing the pistol.
He would have done. Or Al Khan's, obviously he's now no longer going to be a leadership candidate, but as an ex-Marine, he'd probably just add it to his collection.
What would Andy Burnham do with President Erdogan's pistol? We may never find out. It's Mark here, and I'm in Washington, D.C.
And I'm Deborah Haynes, Sky's security and defence editor, and I'm in the UK, having just flown back from the summit of NATO allies in Ankara.
Yeah, without a pistol. So much to discuss today. The summit was supposed to be all about investment into weapons. There was a bit of that, but there was also a lot of other stuff.
Yeah, it was overshadowed by some of Donald Trump's grenades of his own that were thrown about.
Yes, threatening allies once again, complaining about their spending, even though they're spending more. And he seemed to reignite the war in the Middle East.
All that and more on Trump 100.
Anyway, Debs, thanks for joining us. It has been a pretty whiplash couple of days. Tell me what it's like when Trump world collides with your world.
It's really interesting on the NATO front because, and you'll know this as well, having covered these summits before, like before Trump and in between Trump, NATO summits are really carefully choreographed. You kind of know what's going to happen beforehand. The most exciting thing is the communique that comes at the end, and that's not very exciting normally. Or there'll be some kind of blow up between one or two of the allies that would be on the sidelines, or there'll be some other crisis going on, and you'd be interested with speaking to leaders about their reactions to that crisis. However, when Donald Trump comes to town, it's all about him, and it upends all of the careful choreography of the summit. And you can almost at the beginning of this, when during his first presidency, it was like sort of the shock of capture for NATO officials, but they are now kind of used to it.
Do you remember when he pushed the leaders aside to get to the front of the photo op? I think it was in Brussels. There was that extraordinary video of him sort of nudging everyone to one side. That was in his first term.
He just been made a member of NATO and he just got elbowed out the way by Donald Trump.
That was way back in the first term. It feels like light years ago now. But yeah, so I mean, the news conference, the fourth one, we should say, he did 4 news conferences over the course of the second day of the NATO summit. The fourth one was the proper one. You were in that, I guess. How was that?
Yeah, I mean, we were obviously everybody wanting to get the chance of a question, and because of the security around it, we all sort of went in dutifully for the so Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, he's the first person to do a press conference when the summit officially ends. So we're all in this big auditorium for that, and then Donald Trump was going to be next. And last year in The Hague, what happened was you had the travelling pack with the White House press corps who came in after the Rutte sort of press conference, and all of we journalists towards the front, we all got moved back like several rows, and losing our prime spots to make way for the White House press corps, understandably, for the US president. So this time around, I decided I wouldn't go pushing to the front. I would sort of sit back a bit and then hopefully keep my space. But actually, as it happened, that was the wrong call, because we could have gone further forward, and we all got booted out beforehand. And I think they must have done some sort of security sweep of the room. Donald Trump kept on talking about this assassination threat that he faces from Iran, like how he's like on that number one on their list. So there was obviously a lot of well, it's always a lot of security, but I think they must have swept the room, and it was like a body crush outside with all those hundreds of us journalists. And then we it was awful. Like they had the doors, you had to squeeze back in again, and there was this like stampede to get back to your chairs. And we had to then wait about 2 hours for the man himself to show up on the stage. And then, unfortunately, I had such a good question as well, and I sadly didn't get to
What
ask
was it? What was your question?
I really wanted to ask Donald Trump about his good friend Nigel Farage, because obviously you know that Nigel Farage has just quit as an MP and is going to be running for re-election. And he was at the July the 4th celebrations with Donald Trump. So I was really keen to know if Donald Trump had spoken to Nigel Farage and what advice he'd give him. And I also really wanted to know whether George Cotterill, the sort of the convicted fraudster that is friends with Nigel Farage, and is seeking a pardon from Donald Trump because he was convicted in the US, whether Donald Trump was going to give him a pardon. But sadly, I haven't asked that question, so maybe you can next time you speak to him.
Maybe I can. Yeah. Anyway, let's get into the summit, because it feels to me like it was kind of two summits running in parallel. There was the NATO summit, and then there was the kind of Trump show that was going on alongside that. And I was talking to a diplomat from, in fact, an ambassador here in Washington from a pretty key European country last night. And he said to me, look, at the end of the day, the communique that was written, I couldn't have written it better myself. I couldn't have made it more positive myself. It was an incredibly good communique. But we had to go through a lot of turbulence over those 2 days to get to that point. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, we all had whiplash by the end of the day, because it started with that. Well, obviously, you had the dinner the night before. So on the Tuesday night, all the leaders had a really fancy dinner with President Erdogan, which was, away from the eyes of the media. But there had been already sort of criticisms from Donald Trump. He'd sort of said about threats how he could withdraw troops from Europe. He again reopened the Greenland wound.
Greenland is very important for the United States, but it's not important for Denmark. In fact, when Denmark was overrun by the Nazis in less than 1 day, Hitler beat them out in 1 day, took over. They asked us to take care of Greenland. In fact, we took Greenland, and then stupidly we gave it back. We shouldn't have given it back to them, because we're the ones that need it. We need it for protection of the world, not just the United States.
We thought it was going to be thorny and difficult. And then when he arrived on the Wednesday morning and gave that first little press conference with Mark Rutte, and just laid into ally after ally, including the UK, once again kind of sort of slagging off Keir Starmer, really slamming Spain, and also talking about Greenland. Like, he's really angry about the Iran war, and how, in his mind, the UK, Germany, France let him down. They weren't there. He doesn't need their support, but he was testing them. And then on the Greenland thing, he clearly doesn't think that Denmark is doing a good job in his mind. And, obviously Denmark's saying Greenland's not for sale. So there were all these sort of combustible, like, oh my goodness. And Mark Rutte, who's known as the Trump whisperer, was in like full charm mode, trying to kind of diffuse it all.
But you did what Eisenhower started trying to do, equalizing the
Europeans.
He
tried, yeah. Eisenhower tried.
And all the other presidents, none of them were successful. You're the first one. It's your win. Your win in The Hague.
That's why I like him.
And the win now.
That's why I like him.
This is true. Without you, this would not have happened.
Mark Rutte is up there with Gianni Infantino in terms of sycophancy to Trump, isn't he?
It is, and it's weird, but it's fun. It was interesting, I thought, listening to that interaction, that key interaction with the two of them, where Donald Trump just went off on one and was absolutely, slagging off ally after ally, severing trade ties with Spain. And then
In
Mark
real
Rutte,
time. In real time.
and then Mark Rutte, then dear Donald, we can't. Everything is thanks to you. Look at the billions and trillions. It's the Trump trillions of money in defence, and so all that fawning, which he does, so much, and it's kind of like cringe. You want to puke. But then as well, he was needling in and gently kind of saying, Spain is doing more, and you've got a good relationship with the UK. Remember King Charles. So he, actually, I thought that he handled it quite well. I can't believe I'm saying that, but it's fawning sycophancy, but it's not complete bending over.
I agree, and I think I talked about this, I think, with James on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. James was very much of the view that this is puke-inducing sycophancy, and my view was that actually, look, Mark Rutte, he swallowed his pride, and he was asked about it yesterday. I think it was a Danish journalist said, how can you live with yourself?
Yes, the guy sitting next to me actually in the press conference.
Right, what would the old Mark Rutte think of this Mark Rutte? And Rutte just kind of battered it away. He's not beholden to voters. He doesn't need to worry about, criticism. He is the Secretary General of NATO. He has one job: to hold this alliance together. And this alliance right now, at least, maybe in 20 years it doesn't, but right now it needs America. So his job is to hold it together, and he will do that one way or the other. And there's a thing that I heard about recently, you've probably heard about this, called Rutte's Law. Do you know what Rutte's Law is?
Oh, no, I haven't. Go on, tell me.
Rutte's Law apparently is to simplify and exaggerate. Which sounds very similar to someone else's law, Trump's law: simplify and exaggerate. So what Rutte is doing is simplifying everything for Trump, exaggerating a little bit, trying to hold the Trump administration within NATO and hold the whole thing together. So sycophantic, absolutely, a little bit puke-inducing, probably, but it kind of worked, didn't it? It certainly worked yesterday.
Honestly, that's what I was going to say. It did work. So you had all this thorny blow up and ruptures, and then they went into their closed door. It's the big main event, the North Atlantic Council meeting, which is where they sort of each leader talks and has their moment in the sun. And if Donald Trump is to be believed, it was a love-in. He sort of came out saying, "Oh, they all love me. We love you, sir," but which is I'm assuming they didn't all kind of say that. However, what did happen, and will be music to all of the rest of the Allies' ears, is that he said that we are united. It was a tremendous summit. It was a tremendous success. And, you talked about that communique, and the ambassador that was talking to you. I totally agree. The communique couldn't have been written or agreed by a more united alliance. Everybody right at the top recommitting, ironclad commitment to that core Article 5 principle that an attack on one is an attack on all. And that is success for Mark Rutte and the rest of the Allies. They stagger on for another year. But actually there is an interesting question about is there going to be a summit next year? Because there's all this, there was sort of rumour and stuff about how Donald Trump isn't happy about it being in Albania. Albania is the next location, and Mark Rutte was asked, is it going to happen next year? And he said, we've agreed that it will be Albania, but we haven't yet set a date, which to me was are we going to be delaying it? I don't know. But I think that was another, the fact it was in Turkey was really lucky for the Allies, because Donald Trump has a really close relationship with President Erdogan. I'm sure he brought his pistol home with him on the plane. But he actually made the point, didn't he, when he arrived on Tuesday, that he might not have come if it hadn't been for the fact that it was in Ankara.
Imagine if the diary alignment had meant that that this is NATO summit was in Madrid. So that was lucky. Yeah, you mentioned Greenland, Debs, and the grenades thrown more broadly. I was certainly being briefed prior to this summit beginning that the Europeans or the other NATO members didn't expect that the Americans and Trump were going to come to this summit for a fight. But it didn't look like that in the early hours, did it? Because there were grenades going everywhere. The Greenland thing, for example, you mentioned that. What I'm told is that those underneath Trump in the US administration didn't want him to bring Greenland up and hoped that he wouldn't. But he did bring it up, actually in response to a journalist's question about it. And then he kind of doubled down on the whole Greenland thing again. It's worth saying that I think he does want to own Greenland, whatever that means. That there are personal ambitions he's got behind Greenland, the legacy of expanding US territory, the geopolitical importance of Greenland as well. But it's not popular. It's not a popular move even over here in the United States. So no one wanted him to bring it up, but he did bring it up, and it was one of the grenades that was thrown.
Yeah, and they had to deal with it on the NATO side with like the Danish Prime Minister again, effectively saying that her country would obviously defend its territory at any cost, which clearly would then mean direct confrontation with the US if they were really to take it to that other level. It does seem it's more about wanting to buy Greenland, and she again said it's not for sale. And I actually, the horrible doorstep that you're so good at. I hate them, the doorsteps where the leaders kind of come through and the journalist rabble are like elbowing, trying to get a question. I did get a question to the Icelandic leader about this, and I thought her response was really good. She was sort of saying how, we need to be united as allies. Like the big threat is Russia. And we're only going to be able to deal with that threat if we all work together. And, sovereignty needs to be respected. Territorial integrity of Greenland, Iceland, all allies needs to be respected. So very firm line from the Europeans too.
But I do think the question, certainly for the Danish, but for the Europeans more broadly on Greenland, was this another sort of flash in the pan by Trump, or is this the beginning of a new mad journey to try and acquire Greenland one way or the other? We will see. But I do think the Danes are taking this seriously as they were back in January. And of course, Deb's Iran. Not directly a NATO issue, but it was always due to be discussed at NATO. But I don't think anyone expected that actually the wheels would come off the ceasefire while the NATO summit was ongoing.
Yeah, and I think the big casualty of that was Ukraine, because up until the moment that the US decided to launch that latest barrage of strikes in response to what Iran had been doing in the Strait of Hormuz. Ukraine, the fact that Trump was having a meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky, that was a real focal point for the summit. But then suddenly, as things happen, the pivot was then to the fact that there was live fire from the US against Iran again. Donald Trump saying that in his mind, the ceasefire was over, though negotiations continue. And so the fact that you had that reignition of the war in the middle of the summit obviously meant that it really did take a much more prominent position than it would have done otherwise. And I think Ukraine, a lot of important decisions are made around Ukraine, including to do with the Patriot missile systems, or the Patriot missiles, the air defense systems, which Ukraine desperately needs. But it was rather overshadowed.
Manufacturing them now potentially in Ukraine, which would be a game changer.
Massive move, because Volodymyr Zelensky, he was at the summit. He's obviously not a member of NATO. Absolutely wants to be. He made a really good point that Ukraine is fighting Russia right now successfully, keep holding them at bay, striking deep into Russia. Why wouldn't NATO want a country as strong as Ukraine inside the club? That wasn't part of the discussions, of course, but he really also drove home the point that he needs more air defences, and there were attacks as well on Ukraine by Russia during that summit too.
It's worth pointing out that one of the best armed countries on the European continent must be Ukraine, and Ukraine also more capable or more experienced at warfighting than any other member of the NATO alliance, surely.
Yeah, and absolutely at the cutting edge of innovation and the evolution of warfare, drone warfare, deep strike missiles, using clever technology to strike deep against an enemy in Russia that on paper should be able to crush Ukraine and clearly hasn't. And you're getting that rebalancing now. Like he talked again about the extraordinary number of Russian casualties. He said 28,000 killed in June, and the majority of those eliminations, in his words, I think he used that word, were by drones. And I think that I should mention actually a really important part of the summit. We've been completely overshadowed, haven't we, by talking about Trump, but the key theme of the summit, which I'm mentioning right at the end, which says it all really, was these tens of billions of pounds, dollars, euros that have been committed, spent, signed up in hard contracts for new weapons. This huge push to rearm. There's all about new drones. The UK leading some deep strike precision missiles. A lot of heavy weapons. And again, that was something too that I think Trump quite likes. It means business for American defense companies.
I was just about to say he likes that sort of thing. Deals being done. That would have appealed to him. For sure. Do you think that the other NATO members are just kind of trying to ride Trump out now? Do you think that behind the scenes there's a wink and a nudge and everyone's like, this guy, what is he like? And they're just trying to get beyond him. Is that what's going on here?
It's funny that you asked that, because I kept on asking in that horrible doorstep thing that we talked about, the leaders when they went past, that those that actually did stop to ask my question. I've got a lot of rejection pictures too, I must admit, me screaming to try to get a question and them just ignoring me.
I used to love those. I was in Brussels a while ago, based there, and the EU summits. That's one of my favourite bits, when you're there and you're just trying to get a doorstep with all the leaders. Some are better than others. Mark Rutte, in fact, when he was the Dutch Prime Minister, he was always very up for a doorstep. But I can't even remember who the British Prime Minister was at the time. Theresa May, she was a little bit more reluctant, shall we say.
Keir Starmer completely ignored us. It was very upsetting. But yeah, I was asking, so a question I kept on asking was exactly that. Like, it's kind of, surely it's really tiring. Like, they've done, like, Donald Trump's come into office once again, he's like berated the allies for not spending enough on defense. They're now doing that. Like, the majority of them are spending a lot more on their defenses, and yet he's still coming out and like slagging them off and threatening to withdraw troops. I was asking, are you fed up? Are you fed up with this? Like, is it a bit tiring? And the Latvian leader, he sort of talked about how, there are, there are disagreements, but we're all sort of united ultimately. And I thought, actually, I did ask Mark Rutte at the end of the summit, in his kind of like end of press conference moment. I asked him, do you think that Donald Trump, a year on, is more enthusiastic and committed to NATO, given all the spending, or actually is, given that he's still really annoyed about Iran and Greenland, is he as unhappy as ever? And Mark Rutte gave a really nice response, I thought, about how, NATO's like a family, and he likes it when families like have big bust ups and disagree, and if they're all like woo, harmony, then it's actually a bit fake. As I thought that was quite a nice response. I mean, it's him being a diplomat, isn't it? But there's obviously an element of them waiting to ride it out. But then clearly they know that this could be this is kind of the new normal, I think, maybe, so that no one's imagining it will change.
No, I agree. I think it is the new normal. I think it's foolish to assume that the old normal service will resume after Trump. It won't. I think America's relationship with its old friends has changed pretty fundamentally. I think kind of the genie's out of the bottle. I was speaking, I think last week to a European diplomat here who said to me, I don't know how much confidence there is in our American friends when all is said and done. So I think, there has been a fundamental dent in confidence between the transatlantic relationship. I also think.
Sorry, just there's like on that point, like there's a really interesting dynamic if it happens. Like, obviously at the moment, America is this overwhelming military strength, but if the Europeans, and it's a big if the Europeans do actually manage to rebuild credible, significant capability, then they do buffer them. They're buffering themselves from the threats, of Russia and China and Iran, but they do buffer themselves as well from being so ad hoc to American pressure. So that, again, would be a really interesting change of dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think that we haven't yet hit peak Trump. I think it's logical to assume that his presidency will become much more intense domestically and internationally over the course of the next 18 months or so. Buckle up, Debs.
Well, if NATO if there is another NATO summit while he's still president, and that's another question.
Well, that would be maybe quite smart of them to not have one. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us, Debs. And remember to listen to Debs's absolutely fantastic podcast, The War Game, which is available wherever you get your podcast. I think it's a 6-part series, and it's utterly compelling. Make sure, too, that you subscribe to Sky News Insider. You will get Insider episodes from us. You will get the Saturday episode. This Saturday is me and Alex Rossi with a deep dive on Ukraine in the context of Trump, electoral dysfunction with Beth and her pals, and also Ed Conway's new podcast. It's fantastic, so subscribe. Debs, thanks so much for joining us, and we will see you next time.